I agree there is an epidemic in this country of people who don't want to work. The people I'm talking about are the Wall Street freeloaders, the masters of passive income.
UAW President Shawn Fain did a fantastic job during a hearing on the idea of mandating a 32-hour work week, or better known often as a 4-day work week. And here I am on a Saturday working to discuss this. Now, this is my choice. No one told me to work today, but I think this is a good opportunity to once again discuss this issue. I've discussed it before when previous studies have come out about a 4-day work week. I'm going to get to one example in a second here. But this is, this hearing got lost in all the noise of whatever else was happening last week. But I think it's important to now and again come back to this idea, because this is, as Bernie Sanders says here, not a radical idea. It's time for working people to benefit from advancements in AI, automation, and new technology, not just corporate CEOs and wealthy stockholders on Wall Street. He also goes on to say here, and by the way, to be clear, 32-hour work week with no loss of pay. Goes on to say here, American workers are over 400% more productive than they were in the 1940s, and yet millions of Americans are working longer hours for lower wages than they were decades ago. Now, before I get to the first clip, and I got a few clips from this hearing, including one from the opposition, which is funny because the argument they make, they almost concede the entire point. But the Toronto Star here wrote this piece on the study that was done. This is from July 26, 2023. Could a 4-day work week work in Canada? First ever pilot program reports 100% success rate. So they rate, despite reduced working hours, organizations with the program reported an average revenue increase of 15% over the trial period. So, there are obvious benefits, and we'll get to some of that in a bit, of a 4-day work week on workers, but there are also benefits for the employers. I do find it just generally funny that whenever there is, a story like this story, on a 4-day work week, they feel the need to focus on the benefits for the employers, because that is often what all news stories center is capitalists. Very rarely do news stories about the economy or working center the employees or the workers. But this one here, this study was done by researchers at Boston College. The North America study, which included 9 Canadian organizations and 32 U.S. companies, found nearly 7 in 10 employees reported less burnout after shifting to a 4-day work week, as well as self-reported mental and physical health scores improved by 17 and 12%, respectively, a year into a 4-day work week compared to before the change. So this is a fairly large sample size with, over a year studying this, and a 100% success rate, meaning these companies continue to utilize this after the pilot program. Overall, employees' average working hours each week dropped from 38 hours before the trial to 32.97 hours. John Leland, Chief Strategy Officer at Kickstarter, a U.S.-based nonprofit that moved to a 4-day work week in 2021, said the move helped increase employee retention and dramatically improved the company's ability to meet key objectives each quarter. Prior to the pilot, his organization would be lucky to meet 70% of its objectives, he said. But now the nonprofit is achieving its results more than 90% of the time. On a 10-point scale, companies rated the pilot program an average of 8.7, quote, reporting great satisfaction with business productivity, performance, and ability to attract employees. Again, this is from the employer perspective. And, part of it is because, of course, yes, as I said before, the focus a lot of these articles have on capitalists, but also because it's obvious that this is going to benefit employees. It's maybe less obvious that it's going to also benefit the employers. And as you saw here, at least within the companies they selected here and the industries that this was focused on, it was beneficial for both the employee and the employer. Now, I want to get to the first clip here from UAW President Shawn Fain on this idea.
We have a mental health crisis we talk about a lot in this country, but we never talk about the causes of that. There's been studies done, increases in stress from working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, you're sacrificing family life and things you want to pursue. It causes an increase in cortisol levels, which lead to heart disease, cancer, strokes. But given all those facts, if someone is lucky enough to get to retire, typically when they've worked themselves to death their entire life, they face knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder surgeries, and the rest of their lives figuring out how they're going to survive.
So it's worth noting here, of course, Shawn Fain being the president of the UAW, his focus is, or his perspective, I should say, is largely from that of auto workers, which often is increased physical labor compared to the typical, say, desk job. But even those desk jobs, they come with their own issues when it comes to stress, when it comes to sitting down all day, that leads to other health issues. So regardless of the kind of work you do, the amount of time you are working, the amount of time spent on work compared to being at home or compared to time with yourself, time with your family, leads to increased risk when it comes to various health issues. And this is backed up by, you can look up these studies yourself. I'm picking out one here. This was published by Harvard Medical School with their headline, Only the Overworked Die Young. But from researchers at University College London, they compiled data on the relationship between working hours and heart attack risk in over 600,000 workers, as well as similar data on stroke risk in over 500,000 workers. They adjusted their data to compensate for individual workers' differences due to health behaviors, such as smoking, alcohol consumption, and physical activity, and also adjusted for the presence of other cardiac risk factors, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, and high cholesterol. They found that those who worked more than 55 hours per week had a 13% greater risk of a heart attack and were 33% more likely to suffer a stroke compared with those who worked 35 to 40 hours per week. And there's also slight differences between your socioeconomic status. So those who are paid high or paid very well and work a lot, their heart attack risk isn't as high as those in a lower economic status, socioeconomic status. That is likely more to do with the kind of work as opposed to anything else. And also, I'm sure happiness leads to that as well. The more money you make, I know, yes, there are some studies showing that there's like a certain ceiling on how happy you can get depending on how much money you're making. But the reality is, if you are comfortable financially, you don't have to worry about paying the bills, you're going to have lower stress or less stress, and you're going to suffer less health issues because of that. So there's that connection there as well. But regardless, working more, and actually when it comes to stroke risk was higher in all of those who worked long hours, regardless of their socioeconomic status. So while there's difference in heart attack risk, the stroke risk was actually the same regardless of your status. Now, I want to get to the next clip here from Shawn Fain, and then I'll get to a clip from the other argument from the Republican side, which is pretty funny, but more here from Shawn Fain.
I agree there is an epidemic in this country of people who don't want to work. People who can't be bothered to get up every day and contribute to our society, but instead want to freeload off the labor of others. But those aren't blue-collar people. Those aren't working-class people. It's a group of people who are never talked about for how little they actually work and produce and how little they contribute to humanity. The people I'm talking about are the Wall Street freeloaders, the masters of passive income. Those who profit off the labor of others have all the time in the world, while those who make this country run, the people who build the products and contribute to labor, have less and less time for themselves, for their families, and for their lives.
Shawn Fain here going hard at Wall Street. And I think even those that work on Wall Street would agree with him. They may not agree with him publicly on camera, but let's be real here. They work very little compared to the rest of society that actually produces things and puts in labor and has some sort of positive impact on society and not just on themselves financially. So this gets to the next clip, which this is Mr. King here. He is from the HR Policy Association. I'm going to get to a bit more on this after his clip, because the way he starts his introduction here, he makes it sound like he's there representing some workers, and he's not. But the way he phrases his first sentence makes it appear like he is. But here is part of his argument.
And I am appearing here, Dr. Cass, as you mentioned, on behalf of the HR Policy Association. We represent approximately 10% of the private sector workers in this country through our corporate members. I'd like to start the discussion about mandating 32 hours, over 8 hours, over 12 hours. These are concepts that have consequences. This proposal only works if you reduce 8 hours a work week and have the workers have the same level of productivity that they had at 40 hours. It just doesn't work in many industries. It doesn't work economically, it doesn't work operationally.
All right, so before I get to addressing his attempt at an argument here against a 32-hour work week, it's important to be clear on what he is or where he's from. So again, the HR Policy Association that he claims here, what did he say? He represents 10% of the private sector workforce through our corporate partners. It's like the way he phrased that sentence, the way he structured that sentence was incredible. That the association, they have 400 members. These are corporations. Their members employ more than 20 million employees. That has nothing to do with the HR association that works with their corporate members. He's not here representing 10% of the workforce. He's here representing corporate clients. But the way he phrases it here is, we represent 10% of the private sector workforce through our partners. Like, it's so dishonest. And when you start like that, it's really hard to take the rest of any attempt at an argument seriously. So, like he says here, this only works if you have the same level of productivity, which he's kind of making the argument for it, because as we've seen from various studies like this one I showed you earlier, that's exactly what happened. It was the same level of productivity reduced to 4 days. And in fact, a lot of these companies increased revenue by an average of 15% over the trial period of a 4-day work week. They saw increased productivity. They saw incredible benefits. Again, that's just the corporate side. The employees, of course, also saw massive benefits. Shorter working weeks lead to happier and healthier employees, and the organizations that they work for are better positioned to attract and retain talent. Benefits all around. Now, his other argument as well, it just doesn't work for many industries, economically or operationally, which were the same arguments being made against the idea of a 40-hour work week or against the idea of outlawing child labor. Yes, as things are currently structured, it may not work economically or operationally. But what's more important? Prioritizing the health and well-being of people or the current projections for the next quarter for these corporations? I think what's more important is prioritizing the benefits for the people's livelihoods. That should be the focus. And then whatever needs to change operationally or economically around that needs to change. That's why there are laws. That's why there are regulations. These corporations are going to have to abide by them. That's the reason they exist. So to argue the corporate side as if that should be the single focus is ensuring there is no disruption to the current way that things operate with these corporations is absurd. It's just, again, but that's his perspective. His perspective is representing these massive corporations, or as he would put it, 10% of the private sector workforce through our partners. So that's, excuse me, I'm sick and working on a Saturday. It's incredible. But that's his perspective. So, that's why he's there. He was brought there by Republicans to offer this other perspective. But the counter perspective is there isn't much to it. Because as you have even seen, corporations agree with this idea. Now, of course, all of them don't, otherwise they'd be doing it currently. But I think a lot of it really is a mindset shift. Like it's whatever we are born into, the culture that we're surrounded with, what we're used to. Any attempt at disrupting that, at disrupting any kind of societal norm, is always going to be met with pushback, both from those in positions of power, but also even just regular people who are not used to hearing the idea of a 4-day work week, have to be convinced of it because it sounds radical to them, because their entire lives that has not been the case. But that's why these studies exist. That's why these sorts of hearings are out there, or why they happen, to help to bring these ideas to the forefront and have it discussed, and potentially, hopefully, at some point lead to a place where this kind of thing can be mandated.